right.
We'll go with the ladies first, so that Ruby takes over then.
See, Ruby remembers everything. I don't remember much.
I remember things a lot different than you do, probably.
What was it like growing up with all them people in one house?
Busy. Really busy. It was, if you watch the Waltons, it's pretty close to that. But actually, us kids were really blessed. When I think about it now, or when I was writing on my book, I thought, how can we be so blessed? Because you hear so much wrong with families and everything else. And if there was anything wrong with our family, it was just the boys outnumbered the girls.
That was a blessing.
But no, I would say that if any of you are interested in this kind of stuff, start it. Because it was my mom that told me shortly before she passed away, and she lived with us for the last 5 years on and off. And she told me, she said, we'd get talking about old times and how things used to be done and what the difference is now. And she said, you really should write a book, Ruby. She said, I wish that Grandma Dora had written a book. That woman was a true pioneer woman, because they moved up here from Wisconsin in 1899 and got up here and started to get their homestead going when Grandpa died in 1908, I think it was. So they hadn't even got the homestead going so that she could have some way of making a living for the family. And so that's how come there got to be a Goos, Minnesota. You probably don't know about that, but there was a Goos, Minnesota. You can look it up, and I looked it up in the computer, and she ran the post office from 1899, I believe it was, until 1912, I think. I've got the dates written down. If I had known about this beforehand, I could have looked it up.
What did you look my way for? It was before my time.
Well, it was before my time too, but anyway, Mom and I would talk about that, how a woman could manage to do that. She must have been one smart cookie, for one thing, because of all the 5 kids, my dad was, he went through the 4th grade, and Ed and Rudy went, I think, about the same, and Grandma taught them. And when you stop to think about it, with the kids to raise and the farm to take care of and everything else, I don't know how she did it. But every one of the kids could read and write and do math and stuff like that. It was awesome. When I think about it now, how she ever managed it. And then she had we called it a halfway house, which is not what we're supposed to call it now, but if you study the history of Roseau County, to get from Roseau to Warroad in the summertime was about an impossibility, because there was a big slough in there. In fact, there's a railroad car sunk way down by, it's in the Salo area, and they never did get it out. But anyway, they couldn't get between the 2 towns unless they went to the ridge up south of Roseau, which was a road that everybody knows, if they're our age, as the summer road. They would go from Roseau up to the summer road and go to Warroad that way. Well, it took more than 1 day, so Grandma had a halfway house. They'd stop there and feed their horses and have a meal or 2 and stay overnight, and then go on the next day to Warroad. And so that was why there was the summer road and the winter road.
If you
And
get
it's-
one of an old history book or geography book, they call them, and on the inside there's a map of the United States, and if you look on there, there'll be Goos, Minnesota on there.
Yeah, I got a postcard from Goos, Minnesota that's been stamped and mailed and from International Falls, and it was from Grandma Dora. So I'm thinking if she must have, I don't know why, that's why I say a person should ask questions. What was she doing in International Falls? To mail a card and ask how the kids were doing and everything up to the post office at Goos, Minnesota.
Yeah, because that had to have been a heck of a jaunt to get to International Falls.
Oh yeah. But I think Aunt Laura worked there. She was the oldest of the kids, and I think she worked there for a while.
I don't remember much about it, but tell them a little bit about the Lovejoy place, the homes, the original homestead there.
Yeah, when they first came up and were looking for their homestead, first off, they left from...
In what year?
In 1899, they left Wisconsin to go up to Roseau, well, to that area, whatever it was then. And anyway, they went through Minneapolis and St. Paul and Fargo and Pembina and Kenora or Winnipeg and Kenora, and then they by train. And then when they got to the Lake of the Woods, they got on a boat and went from there. And I asked Dad, why did they go all the way around like that when they could have just went up to the Duluth and then just went kitty corner right up across the state? Dad said there were no roads. Well, you look at the forest of stuff in there, you could see there wouldn't be an easy way of doing that. So they come around that way, and when they got to Warroad, they didn't have a place to stay, so...
They realized they didn't want to stay there.
No. Racist. But anyway, they stayed with Chief Nalapuk in his cabin for a couple weeks, I believe, before they got a place to put their feet down. But Dad said that Grandpa had got a team and wagon, and they started heading west. And every so often he'd stop and get out and shovel up a bunch of dirt, and if it was what he wanted, that would be where he was going to file his claim. Well, they kept going until they got to the place where the homestead is now, and that suited them. So they got the homestead there, and Grandpa is buried out on that land. Right, it's north and a little bit east of Earl's house.
Pretty much straight east.
Yeah.
Didn't you fix it up?
Yeah, they did, but there were no established cemeteries then, so Grandma's buried in Malung, and I know at one time Dad said they talked about moving Grandpa over there, but he'd been dead for so many years that they just figured there wouldn't be anything to move,
I think there's 7 people in that cemetery.
Yep, there was...
And a Comstock boy that was 17 years old when he got killed in the sawmill accident.
Mm-hmm. And there was a Mr. and Mrs. It's in the book.
There was a Civil War veteran that's buried there.
Yeah.
John.
I got the names of
John Chapin.
Chapins, yeah.
Yeah, he died in 1900.
But if anybody didn't know that, how would you know that there was even anybody buried there?
Right.
His military stone is still standing there.
So are there markers there at all?
I think you guys put some there, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the Comstock boys got a little engraved plaque that they put out there for Edward Comstock.
Yeah. But very few people even would know about it, except through the immediate family, you know.
Right.
Earl and I carried, we didn't carry it, a tractor carried it, but a pretty good sized rock. And we made a plaque for that for Grandpa on it.
So is it taken care of now? Like, or do we need to?
I've been taking care of it now for a long time.
Yeah.
Okay. So
But I don't know if it's ever gonna get, mowed after I'm not around to do it or not, but
if I don't know where it is, I can't do it. So
Yeah.
I'll come to you and you can show me.
I can take you out there.
We talked about the Civil War veteran. I think he had served with the New York unit. Is that right?
I don't know.
Well, that's on the plaque now. But I had heard recently where some of the Civil War people were paid. They gave them land instead of cash. So it could be that fella had been given land up in Roseville County. I have no idea. Yeah. But Earl and Morris really took care of getting that marked. So it's there to stay. Those rocks are big. You can't miss them. And
Take a heck of a man to carry him.
and they also went along with getting a marker for Mom's mother at the Catholic Church in Gently. She had been in the unmarked grave for 97 years when we marked her grave for her.
In Gently?
Right.
How many of our relatives are buried in Gently?
I think she's the only one.
There's lots. There's lots.
Yeah. That's from the same family?
Yep.
Well, youngsters, I suppose, no one ever talked about, I never heard anything about it, but
Well, when we went there that day, I was pointing to Dad. You're related to this person, you're related to this person, you're related to that person.
okay. But she had, that'd be Grandpa Bill's wife. She had died trying to have her 5th child when she was 38 years old. And her mother had died at about the same age trying to have a 5th child.
No way.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And who was that again?
Mother, Olivia's mother.
Really?
Armadine, I think was her first name. Yeah, sorry, Ruby, but go ahead.
Yep, that's right. I don't have that in the book because I wasn't writing it that far back.
That was her first name. Now, what was her last name again? That was a long, goofy name.
Oh, it was it was very French, something like Desgousier.
How many acres did they get when he said this is where I want to?
Well, it was 160 acres, and the homestead law was you get 160 acres, and if you lived on it and proved it up, which meant built you a livable house and dug a well and took care of the land for
Was that by Lovejoy's then?
all of it. I mean, the first they got was in Malung, and then after,
Oh, they got that before they got Lovejoy's?
oh yeah, because Malung was, Grandma had that, and, or Grandma and Grandpa, because it's in Klaus's name, I think, I've got records from the post office, or from the courthouse. But then I don't know what year it was that Grandma took a homestead in Cedar Bend Township. And so I asked Mom, I said, why did she take another homestead when she had one? And Mom said, well, I don't know for sure, she said, but I think it's because there was so many boy gooses that she wanted some to each have a chunk of land, you know, I suppose. Otherwise, why would they go that far? And it was about, well, it's south of Salo and a little bit east.
Tread along the Summer Road.
Yeah, it's along the Summer Road where everything was. And
There's still a silo standing there. The old barn just went down there not too long ago.
and I don't know who bought it from her, but the people that owned it at the time when I was little and Mom and Dad were telling us about it, their names were Lovejoy. and I don't know who has it now. But
It's one
anyway,
of the boys, one of the Lovejoy boys,
Where's this silo at that you're talking about?
on the Lovejoy place.
it's on a curve.
Yeah, east of Billy
Only one on the road.
East of Billy Higgins, if you know where Billy
Yeah.
Higgins lives.
That's what I'm saying. Ask questions when you guys think about them, because I've got questions now that I wish I would have talked to Mom, and Mom and Dad were really good too. My mom knew a whole lot more about the Goos family than she ever did about her family. And I don't know why, but there was a stretch of land between Malung Township and Cedar Bend Township, and those days it wasn't easy to travel a lot, so we didn't get to see them a whole lot. But I remember Dad said that when Grandma took the homestead there, they took some cattle up there with them, and their youngest daughter, Minnie, she went with her, and the women stayed up there during the summer, and the guys would walk back and forth between the Malung one and the Cedar Bend one, and it sounds like that would be, why didn't they take a horse? And Dad said because the horses were needed for work, and they didn't do any of that kind of stuff done on. You went to a house party or whoever had anything going on, you didn't take the horses. They stayed home because they needed to rest.
Your dad played.
All right for you to go out there, but
Your dad and Minnie didn't they play a lot of barn dances?
oh yeah, my dad was a really good fiddle player.
I could remember he played the fiddle and jig at the same time.
Yeah, yes, my kids remember that. Yeah. And he sent for his first fiddle, and I thought, how did they? Okay, Dad said they'd get in with a bunch of other kids, and the other kids that were probably home from school someplace, and they'd start singing a popular song, and these guys could sing right along with them. And I said, how could they do that? They didn't have any way of, how would you hear about it if you didn't have radio and stuff like that? And Dad said that Grandma must have loved music because she joined a record club back in the early, and so they got all the latest records that way, and that's how Dad said he decided he was going to try and play something, so he sent for a fiddle in Sears and Roebuck, I think it was, and he paid $14.95 for it. And by the time he got the fiddle at night, he knew how to play a tune. It just come like that. He played at many house parties and barn dances, and they didn't go away. You did your own community partying and stuff like that. There was no way to get around, so you had it at your place. I have a picture, I think it's in the book, of the bunch of people gathered on the west side of their log house, and it was a Sunday afternoon gathering. They either played ball, of which Dad and Ed and Rudy all three played. I don't remember ever seeing Ed and Rudy play, but I remember my dad played until he must have been in his 40s, well, because
He
I
pitched
remember
too,
him.
didn't he?
Huh?
Didn't he pitch too?
Yeah, he was a pitcher, and I remember watching him when I was a kid.
Rudy was the manager.
Rudy
Yeah,
was the manager?
Manager, yeah.
Of the Malung team.
Oh, well, he played for a lot more than Malung. Dad pitched for
Yeah.
Fallen and
He pitched.
Beaver and Salo, but they all it had to be local because you just didn't have anything to drive.
His uniform is in the museum in Rosa.
His uniform is?
It's supposed to be. It was. Mom took it down there, but then the flood came, and I don't know if it's still there or not, and I never bothered to look, but it was the Malung uniform. And Laverne was the mascot. Somebody made him a little Malung uniform, and I got a picture of that too.
And
Yeah.
we have that still.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, you do? Yeah, so,
Yep.
and your dad had great, I remember my dad saying that, yeah, Uncle George, when he played ball, he didn't even have to use a glove because his hands were so big.
Well, Dad was a big guy.
Yeah, I know.
And
They're all big.
yeah, and I asked Dad one time, because we don't have, nobody has a picture of Klaus, right?
Anybody?
I don't know.
I've never heard of one.
I haven't either. But Dad said he was a big man, because he said when we measured him for his coffin, they had to make his coffin, he was 18 inches through the chest. So that's a pretty good size through the chest, yeah. And anyway, that's all we know about what he was like, was that he was big, and he must have been, I would have loved to known him, because after all the work of starting a homestead, what does he do? He's made a merry-go-round for the kids. And so Dad said they had a lot of neighbor kids come and ride on the merry-go-round, one that they could, I suppose you had to push it when you're going around, but
Probably had a horse pull it.
no, that would cause the horses to work when they didn't have to.
So what did Minnie, you said Grandpa played fiddle, but what did Minnie do?
Minnie played like a piano. They didn't have a piano, but they had an organ. They had good music.
Well, didn't she play an accordion too? Or?
No.
They were saying you did. You played the accordion.
Me? Oh,
Mom did.
In my younger days.
Yeah. Until just a few years ago.
Yeah, sitting around a fire, one of my best memories.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Those are so cool.
Mine too, since I forgot how to play
She
it.
would play, when Dad would milk cows, she would play because they always gave better milk when Dad was on the radio.
Maybe it was a better rhythm.
Yeah. Yep, that's true.
It wasn't often, but it did happen.
We had a very busy farm. I remember us kids. All of the things that impress you. But Goos Brothers evidently was the big farm for the area. They had
when they got the dairy cows in.
they had the dairy. Yeah, they had lots of dairy cattle.
We had the thrash machine too.
Yeah.
Rudy went thrashing all
Yeah.
the time.
And they raised a lot of Timothy grassy and stuff like that. I remember that because that all had to be bagged in bags, not just put in a truck, And us kids we were allowed out there if there was a trailer that we could be in. You could not be out by the thrashing machine if it was working, and we were not in something because there was too many little kids to watch. And we didn't want to miss lunchtime because that was so good.
I bet.
Bring out a big bread raiser full of sandwiches in the morning, and then they'd come in for a big dinner and then another big lunch in the afternoon, and they needed fuel too. So
I have to butt in here, Rudy.
Yeah.
Rudy talked about how, probably their only fringe benefit was food. They had plenty to eat and good food, and most farmers and their wives really prided themselves on their food. But there were a couple of them that skimped and didn't feed them hardly anything. And he said that the farmer came out. He'd heard there'd been some complaining about the forenoon lunch, and the farmer said, he said that was just meant to be a lunch. That wasn't supposed to be a meal. And one of the men spoke up and he says, "You damn right." He said that wouldn't have been a meal for a parakeet. So it was a lot of social pressure on the wives. Yeah.
Even back then.
And us kids, the farm dealers in Roseau, the machinery dealers, I remember them coming out and demonstrating their new equipment so that they could sell it to the Gooses. And so we had this well, Archie Lee was the main machine dealer in Roseville at that time. And when these little boys heard that Archie Lee was coming, we were playing the dirt pile, and they all wanted to be Archie Lee. Because when he drove in our yard, he'd come down the driveway and into the, you know, like, and the women would get so mad because there was little kids running all over, you know. But didn't lose any. But anyway, I remember that part of it, and I remember so many things that you, when I was writing the book, it all come back. So do it. There was a lady in Fergus Falls Library here when she found out, she was helping me because I didn't know much about my computer when I first started. I didn't know about setting up pages and numbering and pictures and placings and stuff like that. And the library in Fergus Falls, you go there, you would get a free, I think it was once a week or something like that. And she found out what I was doing, and she said, I think that's just wonderful. She said, that's such a good idea. And she was just in college herself. And just last year, I was in there again, and she happened to be working. And she said, you know what? I'm writing my book about my family now. She said, I'm so glad that you did that. So I got into it's amazing, she said, of what she's finding out. That Norma and I, one time, we used to talk a lot on the phone.
Yep.
Always.
And Lorna.
But this time Norma and I were talking about, and Norma called me and she said, Ruby, do you remember when they used to fry up all that meat and put them in these big stone crocks when it was butchering time? And then when we used them, they would just go and chip a piece of meat off, like if they wanted a steak or something like that, take it up and heat it up in this pan. Why didn't we die? And we figured it out, and I found out from the extension too, is that they sealed those so good with melted lard that there was no chance of air getting at them. They had to be absolutely sealed.
Like lutefisk.
Yeah. And they were big.
Did you guys know that it was your dad, Ed, that done all the butchering locally?
Yeah, Ed was the chief butcher.
The butcher.
I know that.
But was that a busy place? Because we butchered beef and pigs and chickens.
And the farmstead? Yeah.
Oh yeah, down the basement.
A lot of
Yeah.
farms that
She brought the animal into the basement and butchered it?
No, they shot it outside.
She said in the basement.
We
I was
had
like, that's just wrong.
we had trouble getting them down the
I was
stairs.
gonna say, you push it?
they had a building.
They processed it downstairs.
Yeah.
So
No.
I just gotta clarify.
It took days
And if
to
they
get.
had that big thing, if they covered it with lard, then, I mean, what would they do when they would have to eat the whole thing then, or they would?
No,
recover
you
it again?
you took out what you wanted.
And then recovered it with lard again.
Yeah, it had to be sealed, you know.
Right. Wow. And even that.
Well, that's the only way we could figure it out,
That's
because
the way we done it at our place.
And it was in like a crock then.
a big
With a big
stone crock,
you know,
yeah.
what do they call them? 50-gallon.
We had many of them. And they had that big pantry there, and always a big bowl of cottage cheese sitting there. I thought that was the worst thing. But it was always on the table in the pantry, and I know my mom said that she was the bread maker. She said she baked 11 loaves of bread every week. 11 loaves of bread every week to feed. Yeah.
You remember when they started freezing food and meat and so on?
After we got electricity is all I remember, yeah. And that was
Remember where the first freezers were? They'd rented lockers plant. They'd rent
Oh, yeah.
space in Warroad.
Yep.
Warroad had the first
Use your mic.
commercially available
Use your
freezer.
mic. Use your mic.
There you go.
Hello.
He just woke up.
Warroad had the first available
freezer in the area. You could rent a box there where you could keep whatever you wanted there for a rental charge. Then the people started to buy their own freezers. I suppose they couldn't all get a freezer right away.
A lot of them didn't.
Yeah.
We were one of the first earlier ones that had the electricity, for one thing. Because when we moved from that farm, my folks bought a farm. They wanted to get off on their own and bought a farm away, well, on the west side of Roseau, and it didn't have electricity. So we left electricity and went to not having it.
Wasn't it about 43 or something?
Yeah. And then when we went and they got electricity, then we got the whole wind charger and everything out at our farm, so we had electricity then. Not the full kind, but the 32 volt. When we had it, if I remember right, the only thing that they used it for was milking cows and pumping water. Because all that cattle took an awful lot of water, and that was an awful lot of pumping. I mean, so.
You talked about Archie Lee. I remember the first brand new tractor they bought from him in 1945 was a W9 McCormick Daring, and they got it on my birthday, so it was a birthday present for me.
Yeah, I'm sure we reminded you of that.
So, like, Ronnie, what made you go to be a vet instead of staying on the farm?
He was smarter than the rest of us.
Well, it just looked like awfully easy money.
Yeah.
And Laverne, why didn't Laverne stay on the farm?
Wasn't it asthma?
Yeah, he had asthma.
Yeah, asthma really bad. I remember that. Yeah.
And what made Merle move down the road a ways?
Got married.
Yeah.
That's
You
why?
can't keep it. You can't keep something like that going and going and going. It just doesn't seem like it works. You
He
could,
had his own farm.
yeah, everybody wants their own place, which is why my mom was especially wanted to get by ourselves.
Get away from them damn kids.
Well, no, but you know that there was 5 boys.
And me.
Yeah, you guys, somewhere in there. And you stop to think of it, if you wanted to give your son a way to start out, you couldn't do it with a whole bunch of others ready to start out too, So I think that they did the wise thing, and we bought our farm out west of Roseau and moved our little house. Oh yeah, that's something else I was going to tell you about, was the way people took care of each other back then. We had an old man, a little old bent over man. I remember when he walked worse than me. I mean, bent over like this with his arms sticking out behind him all the time. And I asked Mom one time, well, what was the matter with him? And Mom said, he don't know. He's never been to a doctor or anything, but he was sick. And so Mom and Livia kept going from our house, the big house, down to the Berry house, which was, about a quarter of a mile?
Yeah.
Yeah, and would take him meals and do clothes washing and all that kind of stuff for him.
Your mic isn't, you're talking in your mic close enough.
Oh, can you hear me now? When they got it figured out that it would be better if they moved him over to our house. I mean, there was already about 18 there. What's one more going to make a difference, And take care of him there. And so that's what we did, and we did that for years until he died. And Mom said that her and Livia they were always watching us kids through the windows of the kitchen, And one day Mom said they looked out, and here we called him Barry, because his last name was Barry. And
Carl Berry.
Carl Berry, yeah. But everybody called him Old Barry. And he was walking across our yard, and right behind him come 5 little kids, all walking bent over with their hands stuck out. They came out and chewed us out for doing that, for mocking him, and he just says, "Oh, Dad, okay. But anyhow, he stayed there until he died, and nobody knew. I mean, at least the folks didn't know anything about where he had come from. Peggy has a trunk. That was all that was left in that little house. And so we got the house. That's what we moved out on our new place. And I don't know what else.
Where I live is where Barry was.
Where did they bury him?
I don't know, but I imagine it would be in Malung. I'm just not sure.
Yeah, I think he's over in Malone.
Yeah, Peg.
I want to know, so great-grandpa died after they'd only been there less than 10 years, and you said that the boys had to go work at a lumber camp. How old were they, and where did they go?
I know.
Went to North Dakota to
No, not I want to know the lumber camp.
Yeah, the lumber
I know
camps.
they went out
I
thrashing.
think
They were.
Rudy was the only one that went to the lumber camp.
Oh no.
Ed,
Dad was the one. He was the one that come home with all the stories.
well,
I
In
mean,
the language I heard
my
from Grandma.
my dad was a storyteller. But anyway, they were up at Northwest Angle,
Okay.
and he used to joke with us kids all the time, and he told about all the guys there was to cook for up there, and so the cook got tired of running back and forth from the stove to the table with pancakes for all these guys. So he strung up a wire from above the stove to the table. He'd flip the pancakes over the wire, and they'd go right down to the table so the guys could grab them. And I said, well, wouldn't they break in two? I mean, I really thought that that's what they did, you know. And Mama always said, George, how are they going to know when you're telling the truth? But we knew. You could see it in his eyes. Yeah, he told a lot of neighborhood stories out there, too.
Okay, but what about how Rudy was almost...
Oh, yeah.
Not.
Rudy was working up there, and I don't know that Dad or Ed were at that time. It all depended where it was and when. But anyway, he decided to go home, walk home across the lake. So he started out. He started out, and we wonder how people can just disappear, you know, because he started out walking, and it was pure ice. And that night, the moon was out.
Because he's walking on the lake.
Yeah, he was walking. Yeah, and the moon was out, and it shone down in the water, and it was no ice there. He would have come along in the dark and went right down to the bottom of the lake, and Grandma didn't know he was coming, and the guys at the camp didn't know that wouldn't have made it home. So you could see how people could get lost in the shuffle of everything. But yeah.
So when, I think it was Monica asked the very first question, yeah, how would you know with all those people living in the house? You said 18, who lived in the house?
Well,
14 at one time.
Yeah,
yeah.
but who?
Okay, it was our family, their family, and then
Ed and Olivia and their kids.
Ed and Olivia and it got to be 7.
Yeah,
And then Rudy,
yeah, okay.
Aunt Minnie, she wasn't married yet, and Grandma Goos still was alive. And then there was, we had hired men from, there was a couple of them I know from Norway. The one couldn't speak English at all, but he sure could play the accordion. And that was a big entertainment. But there was about I would say roughly 18, maybe 15 most of the time.
And you and your mom and dad and Leonard.
And Leonard, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And didn't you have cooks?
We had a cook, yeah. That sounds like a luxury thing, but it wasn't when the women were out milking cows too. Besides taking care of the garden and the kids, and yeah. So you can imagine the amount of clothes to wash.
Well, then you didn't have that. I mean, you had a couple pair of pants and a couple shirts and maybe a Sunday outfit, a pair of shoes, maybe two, but probably one.
Depends on what they were doing. When they were clearing land, it was terrible. I remember that the guys would come home so dirty from burning off stuff. They were black from top to bottom, you know, and of course, so were their clothes, so, yeah.
But I mean, you didn't have 10 pairs of pants.
No,
I had all hand-me-downs.
Yeah.
But Ronnie couldn't wear any more I got.
I didn't look at it that way, but
Us kids had one bicycle, and between Lorna and Ronnie and I, them two were wore it out. I got to wear it a little bit, but
I gotta tell you guys a story that I don't think I've ever told you.
no, that could be.
Ruby's telling a story she hasn't told.
But we used to have cats. We had
Still got them.
50-some cows and cats all over, and never killed any because you don't have to do that with a cat. They managed to do that by themselves, but
Lay
anyway,
underneath a cow.
yeah, or a tractor run over them, or something else happened to them. Well, anyhow, we had a cat that had a bunch of nice little kitties, Angora kitties. We were just treasured her so much. And one day I went over. We were living in our berry house at that time, and of course I had to go over and look at the cat situation. All that was left was a few tails and heads and legs and stuff like that. Everything else had been ate.
The daddy cat come around.
And we stood there and cried, and then we decided we were going to bury them.
That was just you girls that cried.
I got news for you. Because we were going to bury them. They were special. So we went but nobody wanted to touch those pieces, you know. So we put straw on the fork and then laid the pieces on the fork on the straw. And we were going through the fence between there and Earl, or it was, this is when Earl and Loretta had, no, it was before that, but you remember when Earl and Loretta's house was there. There was a fence between the garage and Dad. Well, anyway, we had to get through that fence. And when we were coming through, pieces started to fall off. And all of a sudden I looked, and here we are, crying our eyes out, and I started to laugh. That was not the thing to do. Lorna said, "You can laugh, Ruby, they're not your kitties." And I thought, oh, just because we moved to a different house doesn't say they weren't my kitties. But anyway, I'll never forget that, because afterwards I told them, we were talking about it, and we laughed so hard because it was the facts of life. I'm fine.
I was gonna say, because we can move one of them things and set it over you so you're in the shade.
Then he has to move everything.
No, you don't.
Ruby, what do you remember what do you remember about how it was going there when George started farming on his own? Was that, you say 1943?
About, yeah.
Yeah. And moved out east of town and west of town and bought land there. And I remember he'd sometimes come and buy hay. He had a tractor with a good road gear, and he would sometimes come and buy hay. But that must have been quite an undertaking to start on his own there.
Yeah, I've thought about that. He wasn't young anymore either, you know, but it worked out so good. We had such a good place. Loved the school. Was just...
He was an exceptionally good carpenter.
Yeah, he could build anything, you know. And
I worked with him many times.
Yeah.
shingled houses for the neighbors.
Oh, I know. I remember one time talking about that. We moved out there and took our our German Shepherd dog with us. We had our dog over at the Berry place then, but we hadn't been there very long. And then we moved to moved the house out to the new land. And Mom told us kids, we didn't know anything about the homing incident or instinct that's in an animal. And so she told us, you kids, keep his head down now so he can't see where we're going, because they were afraid that he was going to come home. And we didn't figure he'd ever leave us kids, you know. And after we were there for a couple days, sure enough, he was gone. And we could not find him anyplace. So Mom called Aunt Olivia, by the way, who was a wonderful person. Just still miss her. But she said that she would watch for him. She said, because if he does come here, she said, I'll feed him and let you know. And pretty soon here was Smokey back in our yard. And I've been thinking about that. How can an animal, he didn't know his old home yet, but he moved to a new home that he didn't know, and yet he found his way back to the old home and then back to his new home. How can they do that? It's an awesome, that's a homing instinct, but I asked Mom about it, and she said, well, they just seem like they know how to do that, so.
Well, I've always found home yet.
You haven't wandered like he did.
You didn't go very far. You've been there for a while.
Okay, we're gonna take 5. Just a minute.
Pause for one. A little bit. I think we're back in business, guys. Thanks for waiting.
It was a big loss for me when George and Eleanor went on their own. I think Ruby has a story to tell about one of the things that I allegedly did when I was a little guy.
Yeah.
I don't remember it, of course, but George especially served on several boards and so on. He was type of a talker who could get people to go along with his way of thinking, and his service to the community was very important in many ways after that. I don't know if Ruby's going to tell that goofy story about me or not.
About when you come visiting?
Yeah, yes.
we hadn't, I don't know how long we'd been over at the dairy place. But anyway, somebody knocked on the door, and Ma went to the door, and there stood Ron out on the porch. And Mom said, does your mama know you're here? Yes. Pretty soon, Livia come driving the car in the yard. She didn't know that he was there, but he'd come to see Mom. So, yeah, it was lots of good things to remember.
Tell them about our slide down Wester.
Oh, yeah. So I say,
She knows all the stories and you guys aren't telling it.
Well,
I know.
I'm so much younger, I can't remember that. See?
Yeah, he remembers them vaguely, right?
Yeah, real vaguely.
But there is a hill west there.
Archie Swanson lived on.
Yeah, on the Summer Road. It's not a big hill. It's a
Not like Bemis Hill.
no, nothing like that. But it is a rise in the ground. And
That's pretty good.
anyhow, everybody called it Bugby Hill. I don't know why, and I asked Dad, why is it called Bugby Hill? Dad said, I don't know, unless the guy that owned it, his last name was Bugby or something like that, but it was before Dad's time and stuff. Well, anyway, the neighbors tended to gather there to go sledding and skiing and stuff, and finally then my dad, who always was full of fun. I mean, he could think of that stuff to do. He decided to make it so we could go further. when you slide down the hill instead of going down and then stopping. So he built I don't know, probably had some neighbor men that too, I don't know. But they built the stairways up and then the platform.
And
And
about
then-
20 feet?
Yeah, I don't even know. I just know the fun that we had there. And then I saw the Olympics, and that's the way they do. They put their sled up on there, and then they go like a shot, and that's what they did. And another thing, of all the work that those people had to do, they hauled water to make the sleigh slipperier, so you could go further. And every Friday night when there wasn't school the next day, that's where the neighbors would gather, would be down at that hill.
The Muleys and
And,
the Olsons and
Yeah,
Swansons.
Swansons, and I don't think there was any
Winners.
Yancers, yeah. But anyway, we would gather down there and sled and ski and whatever you wanted to do, except it couldn't be an iron runner, because that was too dangerous in case somebody would get knocked down and get run over. And paper or cardboard boxes were allowed, which was a blast. And then when the moon wasn't out, they'd hang lanterns in all of the trees. So when you were coming down that sled, it was pretty. You could see the lanterns shining in the trees. And then when you get froze out, they'd go home on the summer road past our house and stop in to thaw out. I mean thaw out, because it was cold. And we had a furnace that had a grate on the top, and they all used to lay their mittens wet, up on that while Mom fixed cocoa and stuff like that. And you could smell those mittens, and the steam was just raising up in there. But it was good times, fun.
What ended that? Did that burn down or what?
Yeah.
I think it was just the times. Well, yeah, a fighter did go through there, but I didn't know. We didn't live out there then.
Yeah, it burned down.
Yeah, it could be, but you know how everything else goes. If the people don't keep it going, it don't go. So.
Okay, what about the pin story you were going to say? The pin, you were going to tell was
Pin
it Norma
story.
and pins? Lorna?
It wasn't. I don't know. I think.
Norma.
They picked on me, of course, because I was the baby, and then Norma. I've been told I was the victim, so I don't know. But when she changed a diaper, she'd stick me with the pin because she didn't like that I was the boy. She wanted a girl when I was born. So.
Yeah. Yeah, a red-headed one. Yeah.
And well, that wasn't Mom's or Dad's fault.
No.
Then when at night she'd come in the bedroom and she'd tell me horror stories to get me to bawl.
That Norma, she wouldn't do that.
Yeah, she did.
I have a question. Dad's always told us this one story about how he made Grandpa Goos mad at him, and he would chase him around that. You go into the living room and then the bedroom, the bathroom, the kitchen.
Yeah.
Chased him around that and out the door, yelling at him, "Come back here, you little red-headed bastard!"
I was not around when that happened.
Well, he won't tell us what he did.
I didn't do anything. I got picked on.
Years ago, I heard a story, Carol, I don't know if you know this, but supposedly your dad had a BB gun or something and actually shot Grandpa.
Oh, I was there.
It was Ruby.
No, I didn't.
Something about Laverne hid out in the woods for a while.
I don't know about that story. I'd like to know.
Well, we had, when they logged out all of that trees, and those buildings were built with the trees that were growing on their place, and then they,
Including the big barn.
yeah, all of this stuff, and they got Comstocks. Comstocks had a
Sawmill.
sawmill, and they went around and did custom work, and so they just moved over to our place, and The women would bring out coffee and stuff anyway. I don't remember morning coffee, but afternoon coffee, and we were all out there, of course, waiting for us to get a piece of cake or something from that big pan. And Ed was out there, and he was sitting on a log like this. So his pants were pretty tight across the back. I'm not using any names because I don't remember for sure who it was. Somebody shot him in the rear end.
It wasn't me, I know that.
Whoa! It was one of the hired people, I think.
It was a hired girl.
Yeah, and I thought, how would she dare do that? We laughed about it a lot, but... And another time, Rudy came in the house. His overalls had been ripped all the way up the leg, and he wanted it fixed now. So our hired girl, she went over to the sewing machine and she said, well, you got to take them off. No, he wasn't going to take them off. So she said, oh, come on. She dragged him over there and put his leg up on the sewing machine and sewed it up.
Hands on.
Yeah.
I think Rudy was about 80 years old the first time he went in the hospital. Of course, he'd never been married to. He was like me. He was bashful and shy, and he was there, and the nurse come in and was gonna. This Nick Roth was in the room next with him, and Rudy was laying there, and the nurse come and was gonna pull the covers back, and he was yanking and pulling, hanging on to him, and Nick Roth, he said, "No, Rudy, like this," and he throwed the covers off.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
How did so how did Ed and Olivia meet? How did Grandma and Grandpa meet?
That was before my time.
The only thing I know about Ed and Olivia was that Olivia was working at, I think it was the Hagenau Hotel, which would be down where the Citizens Bank is now. And she was a waitress there. And Ed would come in, they cut wood and sold to the railroad and a lot of places and they would pick it up at the railroad station and stuff, and then go over and have coffee or meal or whatever. And I think that's how they met. I'm not sure. Mom wasn't sure either, but she said that it must have been then because Olivia wasn't from around there.
Wasn't they Ceylon?
Yeah, but that's not very close back then, you know.
Oh,
Somebody named-
I heard that she was a waitress in the cafe in Ceylon. Maybe she moved from one to the other. Anyway, Ed was, I think, 16 years older, and but that didn't always make so much difference in that era. I know Dorothy's folks too. He was 16 years older than Grandma.
Dad was 14 years older than Mom, and you had to get yourself established to support a family then, because there was no help from the county or the state or anything. You did it. I remember when Dad said that the three of them had to go hunting because they were out of meat and they couldn't eat their cattle.
They were young then.
So they were just kids, really young kids. So they took the gun, they went out to kill a deer, and they killed one. And when they got it down, nobody knew what to do with it, how to cut it up. What do, you know? So they were standing there, and this man that they'd never seen before come walking over through the woods. And he asked them, and he said, "You boys having some trouble?" And they said, well, they didn't know how to cut up the deer. So he took over, he skinned he took the whole thing and took them to their home. Later on, they found it was the game warden. And by the way, it was not hunting season. But it didn't matter then if you needed meat. And he knew that they would never do it if they didn't need it, you know. So
They do have a heart after all.
they did back then, yeah.
Mainly when game wardens started, they were to keep the people from mainly when the game warden started, they were to keep the people from shooting them, taking them, and selling them. If they was for their own family, they left them all alone.
Wow. Don't do that anymore.
No. That makes sense, though. Okay, now you know everything there is to know.
Ruby, if you want to take a little break, I'll tell them a couple of things here.
Yep, go ahead.
Talk about the summer road, and apparently a lot of people who had lived here at one time had moved on. Lucky thing it's a dog. I can't get COVID from him. Because people would stop and ask if we were out in the yard or if they weren't going to come up to the house, and they'd say, "Where's that summer road?" You know, they were acquainted from years earlier, and then they'd moved on. And speaking of moving on, are you all aware of the story about Rudy and his girlfriend?
No. Yeah.
Rudy was the bachelor in the family, you know, and never dated. He wasn't shy around the ladies, and Ruby tells me that some of the ladies would have been most interested in him if he'd been available.
He was good looking.
Yeah, but anyway, he'd get dressed up, put his suit on, cologne, aftershave or whatnot, and go over to dances at the Long Hall once in a while when I was old enough to remember. And but somebody had an old picture of Rudy and a girlfriend, and they were both teenagers. I've never seen a picture of Rudy when he was that young, and they look so sad on that picture. And the story is that her family had decided to move to California, and they invited Rudy to go along. Well, he didn't think he couldn't really go because his dad had died, and he was the oldest child, and he had the responsibility of trying to make a living there on the farm. And they went to California without Rudy, and she got that 1918 Spanish flu and died from it out there. And Ruby. When Rudy was elderly and living alone part of the time, Elnora would clean house for him some. Isn't that right, Ruby?
Yeah, she'd go out once a week and cook.
And when he was in his 80s, he told Elnora that he still dreamed about her. And then he considered that the biggest mistake of his life, that he didn't go with him out to California. Anyway, we talked about the summer road, you know, the Goose driveway. Now, it's no longer in the Goose name, it's Haugen, but the Goose driveway is on the summer road. And we come up over Little Ridge there, and that's 3 miles north of the highway. South of the highway, 2 miles south of the Spruce Church. Yeah. So if you want to see the summer road, that's where you go, and that's where George and Elnora lived for a short time before they moved out west to Roseau. You talk about Grandpa Klaus dying when he was 62 or 63 years old. Hans Kveum told me that he figured that he died of heat stroke, and so he was totally healthy and one day and dead the next, and I don't know if there was any mortician available or not, but anyway, they said that a couple of the neighbor ladies washed him up and got dress clothes on him and so on, and the neighbors built a homemade casket, and it was a do-it-yourself funeral for him, and he's buried there near Loretta's house. So that was sure sad. And talk about Hans Quiem. Morris remembers Hans Quiem too. He was a Swedish fella, lived not far north of the farm, and he'd come over and hire Morris and I to help pile bales if we were done. And one of his hobbies was homemade wine.
Choke cherries.
Oh, he'd make wine out of many different things.
Yeah, but basically he'd come up and pick choke cherries around home there.
At home, at the farm, we never even had beer. We never even had beer around, so. Hans would say, when we'd stop for a break after we got done piling, he'd say, "You boys care for some wine?" Oh yeah, we wanted some wine, you know, and just give us a little bit. And how about you, Olga? He said, and he'd ask his wife, "You care for some?" "Oh, just a little bit," she said. "Oh, Hans," he says, she doesn't take much," he said, "but she take often."
Yeah, he talked about a little bit, and he come with a doggone water glass like that full. And I'd never drank anything of any kind, and I was probably about 15 years old. It's like drinking Kool-Aid, you know, and holy buckets. Had to go home and milk cows after that.
He knew what he was doing. He made good homemade wine.
And old Nancy said, "By the golly, maybe I give you too much," she said.
And another story about Hans was when they came around for bringing in the rural power, the electricity. Everybody had to. There was a minimum monthly charge for hooking up, and they had to have so many on the mile or whatnot. And Hans couldn't see it, and of course, you know, every small farmer had to watch their expenses. But that so many dollars a month that it was going to cost Hans, he said, "That buy an awful lot of kerosene," he said. So he passed it up, but it wasn't too long. It wasn't too long when the neighbors got power that he wanted it too. He wanted it too, and I suppose we probably had some around our area too. I didn't know anybody, but like Dorothy and her family up by Lake of the Woods, there weren't enough people per mile to bring the power in, so they couldn't get power. They couldn't get power until they paid for the line to come half mile or whatever it was, and they didn't have the money, so they didn't get power until Dorothy was I think 8th grade or older before they got power. And she talked about how he had milk cows by hand yet, and she'd have to help with the milking. And she talked about how hard it was to keep from having the barn smell in her hair because that would be terrible if her town friends smelled barn on her. You know, that would be a tough thing.
Things kind of go in circles, you know. When we were kids, we went to a little school always called the Brant School, and there was no school buses, so we never got a snow break, because if it snowed and the snow was too deep, they'd hook up a horse to the sleigh and to the caboose. Had a little wood stove in the caboose, you know. We'd go up over the top, the drifts and everything else.
And I had motion sickness.
And now it's kind of gone full circle, because they don't have snow days anymore in school now. It's on in home teaching, so just a little bit different is all.
Ruby talked about Dora having a halfway house. Yeah, and she had a reputation. If they had money or not, nobody left hungry. Everybody ate. And think of that, you know. The year I was born, 1937, was the year they built the big new house. And before that, they would talk about how build the fire when they went to bed, and then somebody up at night would put more wood in the stove and so on. But it was quite a common thing in the morning to find frozen water in the pail in the old house. So the new house was most welcome. Yeah. The farm was, the farmers went through the Depression with everybody else, and I don't remember any exact figures, but I know they said that cattle were so cheap that sometimes if they tried to sell a cold cow, the money they'd get for the cow wouldn't even pay for the trucking. Now that's how tough it was on the farm.
Kenny's dad got a bill when he shipped, what was it, sheep?
He shipped 3 lambs and a sheep buck.
And he got a bill from the railroad company. No money, just the bill that he had to pay for shipping them.
That's
Another thing about the
That was
Depression.
back in the Depression.
Yeah, I was going to say, we hear a lot about the Depression. Us kids, at least none of us that I know of, ever knew we were in a depression.
What were the years of the Depression?
It's about 29 through 30 something.
Yeah, late 30s.
Yeah,
Things really didn't settle down till the war broke out. And
we never went without. I don't ever remember. Do you kids? Some kids come to school. Some kids come to school with lard on their bread.
We did.
We had.
I don't remember, but you probably do, Ruby, and they had rations.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
When the war broke out, yeah.
In the Second World War, that was another thing. That goes right after the Depression. We get the limit to what you can get. I remember going with Dad. It was our turn to go in and pick up ration stamps, they called them. And we were a big farm. You got so many stamps for how much stuff you used. You know, like we spent a lot on gas and equipment and all that kind of stuff. And if you run out of stamps before...
Do you have any stamps left of what they look like?
No, I have no clue. I just remember them because if you run out of them, you were out. And I remember Uncle Ed said, us kids were, well, we liked candy and things like that, which we hardly ever had. And anything that had sweets was sweetened with honey, which doesn't make it very good when you know what sugar is like, you know. And we must have been complaining because I remember Ed, he said, when this stuff is done, he said, I'm going to go to town and I'm going to buy a 100-pound bag of sugar and give each kid a spoon. He said.
So did he?
So we must have complained, but otherwise, I don't ever recall ever going without anything except during rationing. Then we did, because you had to. If there wasn't any stuff that you could, I mean, if you weren't allowed to get any more tires or something like that, or gas, and for a farmer, that's pretty important stuff.
I don't remember that kind of stuff, but I know I was the last one, and I had it. You know, the food started at the head and it went all the way down. There was never much left for me. So.
Larry, did you get to ask him?
Yeah.
Yeah, tell the story about Laverne.
Oh, Laverne, he's pretty popular at school that one day because he had brought candy with him. Candy for everybody. Chocolate. Boy, the kids like chocolate. And, you know, store-bought candy was almost unheard of at that time. Things were going pretty good until somebody figured out it was actually X-Lax.
Hey, Dad told me that.
Norma wanted to go along with Gordy to the cities, and he was working for the school and mechanic and so on, and head bus driver, and So he'd have to go to the cities once in a while for bus reasons, and he was going down to bring a bus back, and he took Norma along, and they caught the train at Thief River. And that was the train that stopped at every little town, so every 8-10 miles they'd stop and pick up if there were any new passengers or let anybody off. And they even hauled cream cans at that time, so you'd hear the cans banging, and Gordy sat there sleeping. That didn't bother him, and Norma was getting madder and madder, and they got down close to the cities, and the train had to meet an ambulance. There was somebody deathly sick on the train, and they had to get off. They thought he might have a ruptured appendix, and Norma said, as damn rough as that ride was, something was bound to rupture.
Yeah. But that's another thing about Norma. I always thought it was a oddity and a privilege that there were 3 of us girls, and every one of us got jobs at the bank as soon as school was done. And I remember when Chester Dalquez asked me if I would work for the bank, after I got done with school. And I while I worked there during school, they had a program where the businesses could come and get some girls that they'd want for doing some jobs in their office and stuff like that. It was usually kids from bookkeeping class. And anyhow, Chester came and asked for me. And I thought, me? I don't even know him, And so I was telling my folks about it, and Dad said, well, I suppose it's because Norma worked at First National Bank right away, And I had to choose between that, and there was another office job that was open that was offered to me, and I thought it sounded pretty good. But then I thought, well, Norma works at the bank, and she's making lots of money. So I decided to work for the bank. But that's how. And then when Lorna got done with school, she got a job there too. So.
Stayed at Clarence White's. She stayed at Clarence White's in town.
Oh, we stayed at, Lorna and I lived together at the Norman House and at Clarence White. Yeah.
Clarence White, right north of the Roosevelt Theater.
Yeah.
So I got a question. When Grandma Dora had the halfway house, and you don't know what's staying there,
No.
Did they ever get robbed or anything?
No, but not that Grandma ever said. But Mom said that some mornings the people that had stayed there, they chose to sleep in the barn, and they were gone when the sheriff come. So that, and I don't know how. And Mom said too, that was one thing she just admired in Grandma, is it didn't bother her to. It would bother me if I had strange people in my house all night long.
But
No.
There wasn't much crime then.
But you said she sometimes sat up all night with her shotgun across her lap too in the rocking chair.
Well, I don't remember all of that kind of stuff, but I remember that Mom was just admired her so much because she was such a pioneer.
Ronnie was always kind of an instigator for me.
Sure.
And one time upstairs in the old house, they had lights, but there was a pull string in the middle of the room on the light, just one light. And Lorna was out on a date with Bob Lee, and she was coming home, and Ronnie and I, it was his idea, but we crawled underneath the bed. We laid under the bed, and when she come to pull the light on, we grabbed her leg. She didn't think it was funny.
We're talking about the good food on the farm. We were never hungry, and of course the hired men and so on knew that they were going to eat right with the family, and it was going to be good food and plenty of it. And at that time, some of the men had worked only in the logging camp or something in the winter or in the summer Anyway, they'd come around and offer to work, help with chores and so on, just for food and a place to sleep, room and board. They said they never had anybody that they didn't pay, but they had offers. They had offers because people knew they were going to get fed well if they were there. Food gets kind of important if you don't have it.
Who used to put you and Dad in the chicken fence? You guys had to sit in the chicken coop or the chicken fence.
Well, Morris has an explanation of that whole chicken pen deal. You know, none of the older kids had that. And you know why he said that was?
We put the eggs in the mud pies. And they caught us doing that. And we couldn't put the eggs in our mud pies. And that was Norma's fault.
Morris said they did that because they valued us. The older kids, they didn't really care if they took off or not.
If lightning strikes,
we'll know.
Oh, I must tell a lightning strike story. Mother was just frightened to no end of lightning, and it was right during the day, and quite a few of us were in there, and lightning struck the house, and I don't think I've heard that loud a noise since that. My God, it was just like a rifle went off right beside your head, and the phone smoked a little, and they had remodeled the kitchen, and they had chrome trim around a room divider, and that room divider was about a good half-inch above electric stove, and there was an arc. There was an arc came down from that metal to the electric stove, just like you'd spark the welder there a little bit. That was a sincere strike, I tell you, when that amount of electricity comes into the room. Yeah, that she was even more frightened of lightning after that, of course.
Wasn't that when the trim on there that melted? That stuff that they run around the outside of that.
Yeah, that chrome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember any melting, but maybe there was.
Yeah.
Yeah. We talk about rationing. Rationing, of course, anytime you've got rules, you got people willing to bend them too. And Dorothy's family had sold cream, so they had skim milk for the calves and so on. And they had a neighbor, real poor family with several little kids that couldn't afford any milk, and he would give them milk, and they during sugar rationing, they had so many kids that they would get more sugar stamps than what they could use. So they would give Dorothy's dad these sugar stamps, because Mamie liked to use lots of sugar when she was baking and so on, and of course it wasn't legal to do that, but who was going to stop it, you know? Yeah. And we had a neighbor, or a farmer I worked for there at Monoman. He was on the county board that took care of rationing and so on. You know, they had all sorts of things in storage. Like you could go in and buy a tire, for instance, if the right circumstances come up and you needed a tire to have safe transportation, things like that. And he said he was on the county board that met to decide those things, and he said there was a government fella in charge of it. He said he came around, told us what to do. He said we were just puppets. So it sounded like quite a usual thing. And he said we finished up our one meeting, and this fella said, "Is there anything going on around here for a good time tonight?" And he said, "Well, yeah, there's a dance out at the Flowing Well." Well, 8 miles east of Monoman. Well, he said, you you mind if I come along? No, they said, you're sure welcome to come along. He said, no car. And he said, we had several little kids and more on the way, and I told him, I said, I don't even have reliable transportation. He said, I need a better vehicle. Yep, he said, you do, Leo. He said, you come in the morning, he said, and we'll get you a new pickup. The fellow who was on the board to decide what they would do with the rationing, you know, he saw to it that one of the farmers got the new pickup. I bet that went over big with the neighbors. Yeah. Earl told me that they had purchased the metal for the new barn, you know, the stanchions and the bullpen and so on. And he said then they decided to build the barn right during the war. And he said they had to get permission to use that metal. Because metal was next to sacred, and you didn't use any metal without permission to use it. Yeah, I'd never heard that. So they built that new barn, 41 stanchions, the biggest dairy in Rosal County. Now they're bringing in cattle now for a new dairy farm over by Gary, where they're talking 10,000 cows.
Wow.
Okay, anything else, Ruby?
Didn't you guys have like teams of horses and stuff? I remember seeing like old harnesses.
Babe and May were the only ones I
Babe and
remember.
May, yeah. What's it, Babe and May that we kept long after the...
Yeah, they were there in the barn long after the barn was built.
Never used them, but they were...
Babe and
Babe and May.
Babe and May. But you did use
the snow going and horses running and the kids screaming and... Yeah.
Christmas card.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But anyway, when I was writing my book, I happened to realize how fortunate I was to not go through what some of the kids have to do now. And how I was fortunate enough to have parents like that. And just... You don't realize it until I've been through, like, there's no reason why I should be here today. Absolutely none. I should be 6 feet in the ground for sure. And I still don't know why I'm here. But it...
But you couldn't leave me.
Yeah. Kenny couldn't take care of himself.
He's hungry.
Yeah. But you think about that, like, I was so near death that...
I didn't even know that until Tammy told me.
Oh, yeah. My doctor stopped in the next morning because he hadn't been on duty when I was brought in. And he looked in my room and he looked at me and he said, you know, Ruby, you had to have had divine intervention. And I said, I know it. Because why would I be here? I was under ice water for 35 minutes, and the only way I could breathe was if I could get myself held up to this little pocket of space. And
What's that story?
What's the story?
What's the story?
oh, I thought everybody knew that.
Yeah, I never knew that.
Our church had, by the way, our church has been very important in our lives. I can't stress that enough. But we were serving a district WMF rally, with a missionary rally. And I was supposed to bring a big bowl of potato salad. This included Grand Forks and all around. So we had to have our food there. And Stephen and his wife were living up at our farm at that time. And she was going to drive, and I was going to ride with her. And we went up to the church. I had forgot my potato salad, so we turned around to go back and get it.
You gotta tell them we just did 7 inches of snow.
And when we were going back to get it, we realized the night before it had been terrible. I mean, the snow was so melted on our road, and it was all rutty and stuff like that, and then it froze overnight. So we were not going slow, but Donna wasn't speeding, you know, and we hit the wrong ruts. End over end, right into a slough, our neighbor's slough. And down, upside down, of course. And I could just hear gurgling, and I heard Donna, could hear her. She was on the driver's side yet. And I remember the road, I could see the gravel road and stuff. And the next thing I knew, I was praying, oh God, oh God, oh God. You know how I hate water. Why do I have to die like this? Because there was no way out. Because Donna said, well, do you think somebody would be going by? Because she got a space that when a car tipped at a slant like that, there was a couple spaces of air, you know, where we could, if you could hold yourself up there to get it. She said, I'm going to try something, Ruby. And I said, you be sure if you don't get out that you can get back to your air pocket anyway. Oh yeah, I'll do that, she said. So pretty soon she was gone. She come back and she said, well, I called it in, but they had just moved up here. They didn't know our neighbors, you know, who to call and stuff. Well, they knew Bill and Linus Serene, of course, and Charlie and Annette, but she didn't know what their phone numbers were. So she couldn't call them. So she called, and she just started working at the hospital, so she called the hospital and asked for an ambulance, and then for the Charlie and Annette's number, and that we needed help. And it seemed like it was forever. It was so cold in there. And I told Donna, I said, you go back into, because the house that was across the road that she'd gone and used the phone, they weren't at home, but their door wasn't locked. So she knew she could go in there. And then I said, you go back there and stay there. And she said, I'm not leaving you. And she stood there that whole time. It was 11 below zero wind chill, soaking wet. And
Full disclosure, Tammy didn't tell me this.
huh?
We didn't have that much time.
Full disclosure, Tammy didn't tell me this part.
Oh.
I just gave a quick rendition of it.
Well, that's what happened. And then Annette took Donna over to their place and warmed her up in the bathtub.
So you couldn't get out?
No, I couldn't. And if I let go of my arms so that I could relax a little.
Car went through and there was any more ice than that on each side. You couldn't open the door.
We couldn't even kick the doors open. I tried to get the ice broken and glass broken. Nothing would work. So I waited there, and then Charlie kept jumping in the ditch, and he said, you hang in there, Ruby, the ambulance is on the way. I thought, yeah, right. Yeah, and then the snowplow happened. They waved down the snowplow on a Saturday morning.
What day was this?
Saturday morning.
What day?
Oh, the first part of April 8th, I think, or something like that.
Like 33 years ago?
It was, oh yeah, it was in, right around the turn of the century.
No, 33 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, Charlie kept jumping in the water, and I could hear him splash, and I thought, he's going to be froze to death, you know, doing that. And I said, he said, you just hang in there. He said, the ambulance is coming. And I said, you told me that. No, I mean it is. He said, I can see the lights. Oh, I thought, well, I can hang on that long, you know.
There was no light.
Yeah, no, there was, but
That's not what.
No. I told Charlie I'm going to let go because I said I can't do this any longer. No, you stay there, Ruby. I can see the lights. And so I thought, oh, okay, maybe I can do that then. So they got up, got a chain.
From the road grader. The road grader, not the ambulance.
No, the road grader came by, and they had the chain. Charlie and Annette and Bill and Ines were having coffee over at Bill and Ines's, and they didn't know what was going on except that Ruby and Donna had been in an accident. So they just got in the car and come. No chain. So we couldn't get me out. So it took a long time, you know, and I'll never forget, ever, never. They told me when I left the hospital to be sure and talk about it a lot so you don't have nightmares. And so we did. I thought we did, you know. Maybe not enough if none of you guys heard about it. But anyway, I've never had a nightmare about it.
Wow.
But I still think it was an absolute miracle. I don't know any other.
When you go past water.
Yeah. There's a lot of it on there.
Body temperature was under 70.
See?
And wasn't it Donna that said she has no idea how
But
she
tell
got
them.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
All
She
the
was just pregnant
windows
with
were
Ben.
Yeah.
shut
She had no idea
when
how
they
she got
pulled the
out.
car out.
No.
How did Donna get out?
Yeah. There was
They were shut?
There's no way that they looked at the car. There's no way she could get out the way she thought she did. There was
They
nothing.
opened the doors.
She thought that there was a piece of glass or something like that was how she got out. Yeah.
But there was no
But there's
opening.
no broken
No.
windows.
They had to pull the car up so they could get the door open so they could get her out.
So there was no window
there
or
was no
anything
way.
for her to get out of. Wow.
Yeah, and they kept asking me all the way into town, "What's your name, Ruby?" And I said, "What's your birth date?" I said, and a little while later, "What's your name?" And they'd tell me again, you know, what it was, and then they'd ask me, many repeat questions over and over and over, and Donna being a nurse, she said they did that so that you were with them. Otherwise, you might not have been there. Never, neither Donna or I got a cold or a scratch. About a week or so afterwards, I pulled 2 pieces of glass out of a knee, and Donna pulled some glass out of, I think it was out of her knee. That's all that happened.
You lost your wedding ring. No.
No.
Your glasses.
I lost my glasses, yeah. Yep. And Charlie and Annette they raked the bottom and got my shoes out.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And my Jody, my Tammy's sister, she came up there and gave me her glasses, which didn't exactly fit, but they sure helped an awful lot. Take me through until I could get them from the optometrist.
Uncle Ronnie, what is your worst close encounter?
I was kicked in the head by a buffalo.
No way. When was that?
What's wrong with you?
That answers a lot of questions, doesn't it?
He never got that onto us before why he acts like he does.
When was that?
Oh, one
You
of,
don't remember?
one of the last years I was in Nolan, it's a rumor. It's not fact that buffalo never has trouble calving. You know, that's one of the things they'll tell you. You know, they always have their calf by themselves. Well, this one didn't. And the farmer called and he had her caught, and I gave her a sedative to lay her down on her side to work on that calf that wasn't coming. And when I tried to put a lariat on the upper back leg so she wouldn't kick me. And when I was putting the lariat over the hoof, she kicked me. My glasses flew off, and I had a scratch on each side of my forehead, and I didn't even have a headache from it.
It didn't knock you out or anything?
No, I didn't even have a headache from it.
Did you?
Got the calf, and the farmer called the next morning to ask how I was doing.
I was going to say, did you kill the cow?
What's that?
Did you kill the cow?
No, she was okay. She was okay. She just had to get the calf straightened out. Yeah. Telling you kind of an interesting little incident with my mother when a blind piano tuner come, and he had a driver, obviously, and the driver came in and introduced him, and he asked my mother a couple questions about the make of the piano and how old it was and so on, and she took him over there and he felt around. Oh, yep. He said he remembered it right away when she told him about it, you know, and she said, "Is there anything else I can get for you? Is the light okay?" "Oh," he said, "the light is fine, lady." Yeah. And Dorothy did the books for the office, and one of the things that would happen once in a while that greatly angered her was rubber checks, non-sufficient fund checks. I don't know, do you still call them rubber checks?
Yeah.
Russell was there when she was telling me that, and he comes over to the table where she's working and he says, "Let me see one of those rubber checks."
How old was I?
Oh, I suppose about a year and a half.
I was gonna say 20, but
Yeah.
Well, how about you, Morris? It sounds like you're just lucky you're alive, you know.
Well, outside of starving to death, there hasn't been too much else.
All of us took care of him. That's how come.
Dad, what's this about your 9 lives?
Yeah.
Well, I've used them up a long time ago. I've only smashed up cars, or not the cars, the pickup. I run into the guy hit me in the back end with a. I was working for Frederickson at the time, and out in Pine Creek out there, the water was deep, and this guy come and he turned in a driveway, and I thought he was gonna wait for me to come, and instead of that, I got right there and he pulled out in front of me, and I hit him in the back end, and I didn't get hurt, but I had fine-tooth harrow sections in the back of the pickup, and they all slid forward and pushed the cab ahead and stuff. I tipped the tractor over once, and that was very thrilling. I was mowing ditches and had the gyro mower, and I like to get everything that I could, you know, and I pulled up alongside a big crossing, or culvert in the field crossing, and I shifted into low gear because I wanted to be careful, you know, and I was going up alongside the culvert, and the gyro mower caught in the dirt, and I pulled the front wheel into the culvert, and I went right square upside down into the culvert, running wide open, laying there, and the gyro mower was tipped over, and I was spinning around and around. And nothing was on me. I managed to crawl off from underneath there, but I couldn't find the switch to shut the darn thing off. It was in the wrong place.
What about the one with the bull in the top and the tractor?
The bull in the tractor.
You broke your ribs.
Oh, in the tractor, we were out getting the cow in the barn, and the doggone bull come up behind me and knocked me right head over heel.
You trapped between the tractor and him.
No, I don't remember that.
Must be my other dad.
And where did he buy his ticket?
Say what?
I said, then what did you say about the bull? He just bought himself a one-way ticket to St. Paul.
Yeah, he didn't last long after that.
And then there was the bees.
Yeah, we had canola and Wilmer's had bees there, and about 3 weeks before we were going to cut, they took the hives out. So I was up there cutting, and I never even thought anything about there being bees around. I was going along there, and about the 4th round I made, all of a sudden there was bees all over me. And I had cap on, and they were in this little hole in the back of my head, stinging me on top of my head. And I jumped off. I had coveralls on, which I was lucky because it couldn't get my hands or my arms. But I tried running, and I canola stubble that long, and I fell down, and I'd get up and go again. I didn't think I was going to make her because the bees was all over me. And it took me about a half a mile before I got away from them. I got up to the house, and Earl seen me having trouble, so he come and went up and tried to stickers out of my hands and out of my ears and my nose.
Molly Vicker.
No. We called,
Oh, yes.
we had the swather was setting up in the field running and the canola needed cutting, so we called Molly to see if she had any veil from wedding, because she did made sewing wedding dresses and stuff. And yeah, she had some, so I went over and got that. And I put that on under my cap and got some gloves, and I went back up and here found out I'd cut through a hive of bees that got left there. It wasn't a hive, but big circle like that, about 10 inches deep in solid bees, and I cut right through them, and they wasn't happy at all. So, yeah, they gave me some Benadryl. I probably should have went to the doctor, but I didn't. And I went out and went back up and started cutting again. After about 2 hours, I started throwing up. I got sick. Went and laid down for about an hour and got back up, and away I went again.
You know, Norma and I were talking one time again, and we were talking about how come we lived through all of the stuff that we did, and you know, nothing. Like Norma said, well, if you were sick, you never went to the doctor. If you were breathing, you didn't. You know, so just if you quit breathing, then you'd go to the doctor. So.
How often did you? I remember like lots of fond memories of going over to Merlin Rose's all the time, and you guys always had dances in their basement.
Yeah.
Was that like something you did often, or was that just something?
Only when I was 40 below and storming, and you shouldn't have been outside at all. New Year's Eve, yeah.
It was just a New Year's Eve thing. Yeah. I fondly remember stuff like that.
Yeah, I remember going on in the basement too. It was packed in the basement.
Yeah, it was. I remember that. The basement.
Rosa's the one that taught me how to dance. So.
For real?
Yep. Yep.
And you was a darn good dancer in your day, Daddy.
Oh, I got around.
And around, and around, and around, and around. Kind of like dancing with Jeff and Larry, you just get flung.
I was smooth. I wasn't rough like that.
We all had the same teacher.
Yeah, right? Teacher, no pun intended. So, when you and Earl decided, I mean, how was it that you went into farming with Earl, like instead of Merle? I mean, what was that?
Merle was already gone after I come home from the service.
Okay.
That's when we started farming together.
Did all the boys go into the service?
Not my dad.
Just Earl, Merle, and me.
Oh, Leonard did.
Yeah, Leonard was in the service.
Leonard was in the service.
Yeah.
Ruby, what were you going to ask, Jeff?
I was gonna, you say you talked to Norma on the phone quite a bit. I just want to know how you got in there between Dad and Norma.
And she still worked.
We had an awful lot of fun with Norma and Gordon. Oh my gosh.
We sure did.
Went on trips and
Nashville.
yeah. Yep.
What got Uncle or Norma and Gordy into the horses like that with the thoroughbreds? What got him into that?
Well, Gordy always liked horses.
Yeah. He ran horses at Assiniboia.
Met a couple horse breeders in Greenbush area.
Yeah, old Dwayne Tweet and
How many horses
and then that
have?
He had
Quist.
two of them.
That's it? I thought he had more. So many
The
more.
one wasn't the one named the Roseau River that they raced in Winnipeg with?
Painted River Curve.
Tell them how Norma picked the winner of the horse.
You ever hear that, Ruby?
I was in it.
We were there.
She was telling us because
Yeah.
we were on our way back from our trip to Nashville, which Nancy told me was the only big trip Norma and Gordon had ever taken. I didn't know that, but anyway, we had a blast. And Gordy wanted to get back to Kentucky Derby or to the Kentucky Downs, so that for the opening of horse racing. the fall season. So we made our arrangements so we could get back there in time. And then it was a day after Halloween. Some pranksters had been out and moved some signs so that we couldn't find the Churchill Downs. And pretty soon Kenny said, well, follow that trailer. There was a truck with a bunch of bales on it. He said, follow that. I bet they're going to the... So sure enough, we did, and we got right there. And we got her in, when it's the opening of the fall season, the seats are not near like for the Derby, you know, the big one. But there was, we had our own box. And Gordy sat and read these papers over and over and checking this one against this one.
Breathing, all this and all.
And he didn't do too well. Nobody would say, like Kenny and I, we knew how much, we don't believe in gambling, so we farm. But anyway, we were going to go until we lost what we had said that we were going to lose. And then we started betting between each other, because it is no fun to sit there and watch. I don't care how pretty these thoroughbreds are when they're running, but if you haven't got money on them, it gets awfully boring, you know? So we started betting between each other. Well, anyway, on the way home, Gordon says, Norma, you did pretty good today, he said, and I pretty near lost the farm. And he said, how in the world do you do that? You didn't read nothing? Norma said, well, it's so simple, she said. You go down to the paddocks before the race, and the last one that takes a dump is the lightest.
Oh my God!
Yeah, that's what she said. I don't know if that's what she did or not.
Hey, that's funny.
Yeah.
If you remember nothing else.
That's pretty darn good.
Yeah.
If you don't have any more urgent questions, I want to talk about our recent trip to Wisconsin looking for our roots. Morris had told me that the gooses come from New Holstein, Wisconsin in the late 1800s. And so we looked up on the map where New Holstein was, and New Holstein was 7 miles down, up the road from the town where Little Johnny Goos had a polka band out of Chilton, Wisconsin. They were
Johnny Goos.
Little Johnny.
Real? Is this a joke?
No, he was a...
That was his name on his band.
Yeah.
That was the name of his band, was Little Johnny Goos. And
He was a big man.
Yeah, he wasn't that he was so small, because he was a huge guy.
He was the largest man in the band by far, and I have pictures for each of you. I'm not sure if there's quite enough to go around or not, but Little Johnny was out of Chilton, Wisconsin. So we reserved a motel room in Chilton.
When did you do this?
About a month ago.
Oh my gosh! Okay.
Probably the same hotel that Shelley, you and I stayed in.
It was a chain. It was a chain motel. Anyway, so we stayed with Russell and Sarah, and in the morning we left for Wisconsin. This is over not far from Lake Michigan, kind of halfway between Green Bay and Milwaukee.
Okay.
So it's a little jaunt over there. So we went over there and drove to the motel, and
Matter of fact, it's 801 miles from Roseville.
801 miles out of Roseville. We talked to the lady at the desk there and registered for the room and so on, and she said she had been born and raised there, graduated from high school, and I gave her a picture of Little Johnny and the band, and I asked her if she was in school, if there was anybody named Goose in her school. She said she'd never heard of the name. And we checked in at the motel, and there happened to be an old phone book in the room there with 4 or 5 surrounding towns like they usually do, you know. and we looked in there. There was nobody named Goose in there. So we figured, well, what the heck is going on here? And the motel lady, and I'd asked her about a museum. She said, yep, we're the county seat, she said, and the museum is just out of town here a couple miles. So the next morning we got up and we drove out to that museum, and it wasn't open. Of course, they were only open a few hours on Sunday, and but there was a name and phone number on the door. So we called the name, and I told him briefly about little Johnny. Well, he'd never heard of him. He'd never heard of him either, and he invited us up to his business. He had the abstract office in town, and we went up there, and I gave him a copy of the picture, and told him briefly again about little Johnny, and no, he'd never heard of him, or never heard of the name Goose either, and he said, there's a man in town here you should meet. I'll call him. So he called this man, and no, he said he didn't have time to come up, but he'd come up anyway, he said. and he was an 82-year-old man who has his own polka band out of Chilton, Wisconsin today. And in addition to that, he hosts a 3-hour radio show every Saturday on the local radio there about polka music, and plays polka music. And he said that when he was young, he had met little Johnny. And he said little Johnny was a tremendous accordion player. And he could play the button box also, he said. And he named off the man, one of the men at the end of the picture. And he said, all of my sisters and brothers know these guys. You know, they were all locals there that were in the band. And so that's the story. I left that big picture, like Ruby talks about. If they don't put anything up there, you know, then you have to realize that for a lot of couples, dancing was the main part of their entertainment before television came in. You know, going to dances was a big thing, and of course, a popular band like that would have been a well-known individual, but hard to believe that nothing at the local museum about him at all. And this man who knew little Johnny, he said he had a brother named Joe, and he had a farm over by Jericho. He said, I don't know, that's another neighboring town. So that was interesting, and we came awfully close. We came awfully close to missing that fella who was so darn interesting to talk to.
So how would we be related to that Johnny Goose?
His dad's cousin.
Dad's cousin.
Dad, yeah.
Well, Dad, all the brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he was up here one time. I was just a kid. I don't remember how old I was, but he could sit on that great big accordion and play it.
I watched him do that, and
Yeah.
I thought, how can that be? He was huge, and he sat the accordion down on the floor and sat on the side that has the keys, you know,
Yep.
and he'd play it back and forth like that.
So they went the better part of a half
I
a
never
century.
learned that.
They went the better part of a half a century with very little contact with the family they'd left behind in Wisconsin. Ruby says that little Johnny came back a second time with his wife along. I can't remember
No,
that.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, it was.
You don't, Morris? Yeah.
Well, if it wasn't his wife, it would be his daughter then. I think. her name-
Shelley and I went out to Chilton, Wisconsin. What was that? 35 years ago, Shelley?
Only 35 years old.
You were pregnant with Brandy when we went out there.
How old is Brandy?
Anyway, we drove out there and met his daughter, Jane. And she was a
Maybe
skinny.
it was either her or Ruth that came with him then, because he didn't come alone.
We were going to go see Ruth too, but the night we got there about 10 o'clock, and the next morning it had snowed a foot. and we couldn't hardly get around. When Jane lived out in the country, and we managed to get out to her farm. She's a tall lady, probably like 6'3" or so, and she, in her house, she had it remade so the countertops were higher, so she didn't have to bend over to do the counters and stuff. And she was a tough old gal. She shoveled all her own snow, and she throwed the chains on the tractor and the loader and cleaned out her driveway. And the neighbors would offer to help her, and she didn't need no help. She wasn't an invalid, she said. And she stayed there until she died, which isn't too long ago. She lived by herself. And Ruth was down in, wasn't she in New Holstein or someplace? We were going to go and see her, but we couldn't get there because of the snow. But
They have a brother named John.
they had a brother named John, but she didn't even know where he was because he was a drunk, and they hadn't had no contact with him for years, she said.
That's what he said when they were up to visit. We got the idea that they weren't a very close family because it didn't seem like they knew anything about anybody else, you know. But yeah, he was a big man.
I don't remember what her husband was. Bill Zahn. Of course, he'd been dead when we got there, but I don't know what he did for a living. But I know he was a farmer and they had cows to milk and stuff. So, but it was an interesting trip.
I had Marge take a picture of me by the sign in New Holstein, since I knew you folks wouldn't believe that we'd actually been there if we didn't have a picture. This man we met.
I don't think we ever took any pictures of Jane, did we, Shelley? You got some?
I think I have.
No, do you want more to drink?
Oh, yeah,
Water?
okay.
Want some water?
No, thank you.
This man we met who knew little Johnny from years before, he said that little Johnny had 3 youngsters, and the last one to die was about a year ago at that time. That was Jane. Yep.
So Jane was little Johnny's daughter?
Yep.
Wow.
He had 3 youngsters.
So we got a Christmas card from her every year until just before she died.
She always sent a picture of her dog.
Yep. She always had a dog.
Well, to finish the story, from there we took the ferry across Lake Michigan to Michigan, 3-hour ferry ride, and then we drove north up across the big 20-mile bridge and came back through the Upper Peninsula. Got kind of boring. I thought there'd probably be some farms along there, but there weren't. There were just lakes and trees. Yeah. And we met a couple who'd been there for their lake cabin, and they were from way the heck down the other end of Michigan, Grand Rapids maybe, and so I suppose a lot of the land is owned by people that have their lake cabin up there. Yeah. And that was kind of a boring trip. I ended up wishing we'd just driven back through Wisconsin.
I was going to say before we end this about Aunt Olivia, who was just a gem to me. And I asked Mom one time how everybody got along. But, you know, how many women would there be taking care of the stuff in the house? And all Mom said was, who couldn't get along with Olivia? And that's pretty much what I would say too. She was such a soft-spoken person too. And I remember when I had Peggy, I think it was, and I was in the hospital, and Olivia, of course, come up to visit, and I was telling her that I was so hungry for chocolate cake with chocolate frosting, and the nurses had tried to get me some at the hospital kitchen there, but they didn't have any. So I said, I'll just have to wait till I get home. who was just about the first person to see me when I got home? Livia with a chocolate cake and chocolate frosting. I'll never forget that. So, anyway, that's my thoughts.
I gotta say, she was a gem. She even liked me.
Took a gem.
That was one of her downfalls.
So how old was Rudy and Ed and George and your mom, Honora, and Olivia? How old were they when they all passed?
Oh, it's in my book.
Mom was 56 and Rudy was 83, Dad was 69, and I don't know the rest of them.
Grandpa was 76.
76?
74.
Yeah, I think it was 70. And
Yeah.
Minnie was Sheila and Laura.
She was 80s. I think Minnie was one of the older ones.
Yeah,
Was the
what
older.
about Laura?
Yeah.
Grandma was 80.
Laura wasn't quite that old, but they were pretty well into their 80s and stuff like that.
Like the little kids say, I'll be 85 in November, and I think I'm older than any of my brothers or sisters were when they passed. They were all younger than that.
Lorna was 63. Merle was 69. Laverne was 71, wasn't he? 77.
And how old was Leonard?
Leonard was, you mean when he, let's see. He was 80 some. I know we had his 80th birthday out at Fergus when we lived out there.
I'm thinking,
Yeah.
I should know this.
Yeah, Tammy, you should know.
It seems like yesterday. That's okay. 83, I'm pretty sure.
83, yeah. And Mom was 84. Yeah. So anyway, by the way, several of you have looked at the book. If you want it, it can be ordered at Lundine's in Fergus Falls, because they told me when they did my printing that if I ever wanted more copies, just let them know, because they weren't going to take it off of their whatever machine they have. Yeah. So that's it. Okay?
If we don't get it, Ruby, we won't know.
If you don't get what?
The information.
Well, see, I made it for my kids.
Yeah, but that's,
I didn't make it for you guys. And
thanks for sharing.
well, listen, Carol, I just didn't think that anybody would be interested in it, except my kids.
Yeah, but the rest of us don't have it. And we won't, I don't have a chance.
Yeah, okay, well, you want me to order some?
No, we can have Kendra or somebody on Facebook send us the.
Well, I did have, who got part of one, I didn't print up our part, I printed up.
Because we went on the quilt. No, where's Monica? Because we were going on the quilt trip. And I
On the bus.
on the bus, and I got permit when we went to
Oh, yeah,
Missouri Star.
yeah,
And I
there.
got permission from you to let you told me I could turn.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't mind. It's just that the reason that I did it that way is because, think of it. I mean, who would give a hoot about somebody else's family?
But you are mine.
Yeah, I know. I understand that, but
We've been trying to tell her that.
yeah,
My kids
I still say, why would you be interested? You know? But now when I'm reading it back again, I could see why more things come out than.
She should do an add-on to it now, because she remembers things now
Why
that's not
should
in
I
the
put
book.
this?
Yeah,
It's like a cookbook.
you remember good ones later.
Well, Kendra's son told me, he said, well, I said, there's many things I forgot now, you know, when I read it. And he said, well, you got to do another one, Grandma. Yeah, sure.
Sequel.
Yeah. Huh?
Ruby 1, Ruby 2.
Yeah. Yeah.
Track 1, track 2.
Ruby done.
Well, I'm sure I've more than used my share of the time here, but after I got lost getting here, there was talk that maybe I wasn't mentally capable anymore to to participate in this. So thank you for bending the rules and letting me on anyway. But very interesting part of the family. We're not talking about that side of the family necessarily, but my mother's older sister, the Catholic nun, Sister Marcella, who only us older ones can remember her.
Her name was Florence.
Yeah. And she wore men's shoes. I remember that first time I saw her. She had black men's shoes and black all.
She had kind of a full-time job there. She was given 1 day's vacation a year. She would come to visit every 4 years.
Yeah.
And she was so good. She was so good about answering questions and so on. You know, she wore the full habit. You know, and she was so good about answering questions. What little kids would ask her about, well, what about what's under there and so on. You know,
I said, when I get down there, I'll call Julie.
The last time she visited, I bought my first car, a 1955 Ford, which I bought in 1958, and I was elected after 2-3 days with us. We would take her to Crookston for the weekend, where some Catholic relatives lived, so she could go to church with them. And that drive, we stopped at St. Hilaire at the church, which we talked about, where her mother is buried, and she pointed out in the pews. They had family names on the pews. She pointed out where their family had sat when they attended church there, and I've never seen a person given such respect as she was at that time. I mean, you can see why it was considered a big thing to have a nun in the family. If there was a detour and a flag guy there telling you where to go, and he saw that we had a nun in the car, he come right over to the car and put his head in the door and greeted her personally. Anyway, Dorothy and I were the only ones in the family to attend her funeral. Her funeral was in the middle of the winter when it was 25-30 below at Valley City, North Dakota, and they were they fed us right there at the convent and gave us room to sleep in. They were very, very good hosts, and they had because she had been a domestic and worked for the priests with their clothing and food and so on. They had a new ironing board and iron set up there by the coffin, because that had been her work. Yeah, and I don't remember where there were relatives there from Crookston, but I don't remember their name, and they weren't as closely related as we were. She was my mother's older sister. Yeah, she was our aunt, right? 1 day vacation a year. So that's kind of full-time work. So
one of Grandpa's kids, Tim, his boy was out in Oregon, Raymond, and he moved to South Dakota now, and he's coming up this summer. So we'll get to meet him, and I've never met him.
When is that?
Don't know yet. He wants to go to Gently and see where Grandma's buried. And
Say that, who are you saying again?
Raymond Dulude.
And tell me again the connection, I'm sorry.
he's our first cousin.
Yeah, first cousin. I've never met him. I've never seen him.
His dad was our mother's brother, Timothy Dulude.
Okay. Well, I would like to know when she comes up.
Well, he hasn't told us when he's coming yet, so.
Yeah, I'd like to know when that is. Are you?
Mom, would this be Patsy's brother that he's talking about?
Her dad.
No,
that's Ted.
That's Ted.
That's Ted. This is Timmons.
Tim. That would be Patsy,
Patsy.
Mona, Edie, all of theirs.
No, he'd be cousin to Patsy.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a little insight was that her brother, Tim DeLue, lived across the road from us when we were growing up as kids.
No way.
And lived with Gloria and Ron and Cecile and Tim. And I don't know just where Allison's very old, probably 4 or 5 years old at the time, but Gloria was about the same age, and Ron was older. And
Ray was born in 41.
When did you find out that he wants to come up here, Dad?
Ronnie did.
I got to tell you about Patsy and I had tried to. Her and I were close friends growing up together, and we thought we're cousins, but we're a lot more than cousins. And we got to thinking, well, how much are we cousins? Patsy's mother's name was Laura, of a Beesman. And what were the other similarities?
Maybe Edward adopted and
Yeah.
was Grandpa's
Yeah,
sister.
but there were so many ways that we were related. Just because Patsy was her family, or her mother was my mother's sister, oldest sister, and she passed away, and Patsy was only 3. And her
That's when
name was
Minnie and
Laura.
Edwin got her.
And her name was Laura. So there's, I don't know how many Lauras in our family, and Patsy and I just gave up because we couldn't figure out how we could be more than cousins. I don't know how you can, but
So Patsy was 3 when Minnie and Edwin got her?
Patsy was what?
3 when Minnie and Edwin got her?
Well, they raised her as their own, yeah.
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 And the reason she wasn't formally adopted was
Because her dad was still living, and he didn't want to sign her over, yeah.
How many claws gooses? Is there 3 or 4 claws gooses?
4, I
There
understand.
is 4.
And Heidi, when I started writing this book, I only knew of Klaus and Klaus Jr., I thought, the 2 of them. My grandpa, my real grandpa, and then his dad. Well, anyway, Heidi had gone on this research stuff, and she checked everything out. Somebody told me that there was 3 Klaus gooses.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4.
Yeah, and so I thought, oh my gosh, now I've already written part of my book, what am I going to do? So before I did anything, Heidi says that there was 4. Don't they know anything other than Klaus?
Right?
Yeah.
And then
Related to Santa.
there's Santa Claus. There's Santa Claus too.
I got corrected and I was told that it's close, not claws.
there's another interesting tidbit that I had. Patsy was raised by Edwin and
Oh yeah.
Minnie,
That's another way too.
and Edwin is my cousin.
You're double related.
So
That's what we just couldn't figure out that.
Edwin's the first cousin you?
You guys, you don't have the ancestry.com
yeah.
now?
Elena was my grandma's
Edwin's
sister.
mother was his grandma's.
That's what makes him my cousin, or does it make him my great cousin?
I don't know.
I don't know.
We quit figuring it out.
Before we disband here, I want to be sure to thank Monica and her sisters and Mike. I tell you, it takes somebody willing to host for something like this to happen. So hopefully it can happen again yet in our time, Ruby.
Yeah, I don't look for it, but
I have
thank
one
you guys
question
so
for
much.
you, They came from Holstein, Wisconsin.
New Holstein.
New Holstein. How come you guys have Guernsey cows?
And New Holstein got its name from the town in Germany.
Yes, I know that, yeah. But Dad has got, he said, sometimes he says he's from Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. And it depends on whether you're going by county or town. They didn't used to be that fussy. But they are now, you know.
So, just before everybody leaves, if we're friends on Facebook and you see this picture, that has 488 pictures in it of old pictures of the gooses. So like some of the pictures that are in that book are on this Facebook page.
You guys gotta say how old you are
Goose
for the record.
Old family album.
How old are you, Uncle Ronnie?
84.
Daddy, how old are you?
82.
87.
85.
For the record, okay.
Thank you so much for sharing.
If any
Before everybody takes off here, anybody interested in a print of Little Johnny and his orchestra, I think I have plenty of them along. Come on up, and the price is right. They're free.
I would love one. Does anybody want a pontoon ride or anything before you run away? It's an offer.
We'll go for a ride.
I was going to say, if anybody wants a book, let me know.
You know, what did you say, Ruby?
Shelley?
I said, if anybody wants
Carol,
a book.
you wanted a book?
I would love a book, Ruby.
Shelley?
I am not kidding you. The 13 pages that you let us have, we read it on the way to Who's Fest, and the three, Shelley, Lisa, and I, we loved it so much. You have no idea.
Yeah. I didn't get I got more response from
Oh my gosh.
I think,
Then
You have no idea how much we loved
It was
to read
so cool to read that stuff.